and thank you for joining me on this webinar this morning. I hope everyone can see and hear my screen, or see my screen and hear, should I say. If you can't, just drop a message in the chat. We'll see what we can do to help you out. But we're gonna get started on time with this topic this morning, and I'm going to be talking about how to write the ultimate website brief that your agency will love. Okay, so just a very quick introduction to myself in case you haven't come across me before. My name is Will. I'm the managing director and founder at an agency called Webbox, and we help organizations that improve lives to get digitally fit, and that's often through building and maintaining websites and running performance marketing campaigns. And we've worked for over 16 years now with the likes of the NHS, Fevertree, St John Ambulance, Voyage Care, and many others to help them define their requirements to make sure that the project goes smoothly from start to finish. And it's really with that experience and insights that we've learned over the last 16 years that infuses this content today. Now, before we begin, just to say that I'm conscious that there's going to be a number of different organizations here from different sectors and so on. So excuse the fact that I'm going to cover this topic broadly, but I'm sure there's stuff that we can all take away here. Now, we are recording today's session, and after this, I'll be able to send you a copy of that recording, and you can obviously then go through it again or share it internally with other colleagues. At the end of this webinar, there will be a chance for questions, so don't necessarily wait till the end. Feel free to pop them in the chat as we go through this content, and I will certainly make sure that we leave time at the end for questions. And then finally, we always welcome feedback on our webinars. So if there's any feedback, feel free to send it to myself directly, or you can tag us on socials at Webbox Digital. Now, the plan for this session is to go through the why, who, and how of writing a website brief. We're then going to deep dive into actually what should make up a brief, so the core elements of a website brief. I'm going to leave you then with some red flags. So if this happens in your journey, be aware. So I'm going to leave you with that towards the end, and then some resources to help you on your way, and then I'll be into the time for questions. So without further ado, I'm going to get started, and I want to understand kind of what drew you to this event today. So I just want to understand a little bit from you about kind of where you are on your journey, where this is in terms of your priorities. So I'm just going to launch a quick poll. That should come up on your screen now. And I just want to understand, are you currently writing a brief? Have you actually written a brief but maybe need some help refining it? Are you thinking about writing a brief in the near future, or just generally interested in the topic? So I'll just wait a couple of seconds just for you to pop a vote on that poll on screen. Okay, great. I think we've got most people answering, just one or two more coming in now. Let me just give another 10 seconds just before I close it. 3, 2, 1. Okay, fantastic. So really good to get most of you involved in that. 90% of people participating. Let me just share the results with you. So there's a minority who are writing a brief at the moment or have written a brief and want to get it checked. The majority of you writing a brief in the near future, and then about a third interested in this topic. Okay, fantastic. That's really helpful. Thank you for getting involved. Really interesting to just see where you're at with that. Okay, fantastic. So let's get into some of this content. Initially, we're gonna look at the why, who, and how of writing a website brief. And in my experience, not many people talk about this, so I'm excited to hopefully share some things with you today that you might not have actually come across before. Now, the first one, I'll be honest, is really obvious. Okay, why would you write a website brief? Well, of course, it's to outline your requirements. Okay, now you want to have a written record of what you're asking the agency to do. Okay. Now, of course, we want to be fairly specific. So we don't want to be too, as I've said here, touchy-feely, but actually be quite pragmatic and realistic about what you're looking for here. Now, ultimately, you're doing this because it's going to align both parties. So between brand and agency, you want to make sure that there's a really clear understanding of what the project needs to achieve and your specific requirements. But something which we don't often talk about is attracting interest from the best agencies. Now, if your brief is written in such a way that you've included everything that an agency is looking for, you've added some really clear details, you have a clear understanding of your requirements, but you're also wanting to collaborate with the agency and kind of understand what they could bring to the table. If you're ticking those boxes, you are going to attract the best agencies because that's really where they can add value, okay? Now, also something else people don't often talk about is actually this document can often be used for an agency to self-qualify themselves. Now, what does that mean? Well, look, all agencies have a specialism, an area of expertise. Now, that might be on a service level, that might be on a sector level, that might be things like budgets. They don't look after projects less than something or more than something. So all of these factors can have a big effect on whether an agency says, yeah, this is a project that we want and we can add value to. But on the flip side, it should also allow agencies to say, do you know what, this probably isn't a project for us. You know, thanks for the opportunity, but we'll kindly decline. Now, if your brief is written in the right way, you should actually get agencies saying that because you should be specific about what you're actually looking for. Now, of course, this isn't a one-way street, and we want agencies to be able to also come back and feed into this process. So, of course, I've said be specific in your brief as far as you can, of course. But on the flip side, leave the door open for an agency to come in with their own ideas and to actually say, look, you know, we've done something for similar clients in the past and that we think that would work really well for you. Allow them to be creative, allow them to put their ideas forward because that's really where the magic happens and a partnership is formed. So there's a few things on why we should be writing a brief. Now let's move on to who should be writing it. Boy, oh boy, have I got some stories on this, and we haven't got time to go through them today, but I'm happy to chat over a coffee anytime about this because it's something which I could write a book on. But my first point is the procurement department, if you have one in your organization, is not the person or the department to actually be writing this kind of brief. They've of course got a huge skill set and a huge amount of value to bring to the process, but not to the specific detail of a brief. You know, I remember we won a tender many years ago now, and the tender document, as you can imagine, was quite a significant doc. And we'd gone through it in detail. We had really kind of put a proposal together that addressed the problems and challenges outlined in this tender. And we'd really done our homework. And, you know, thankfully we won that project. And I vividly remember we walked into the first project meeting, like the project kickoff meeting, where we were all excited to get going. And we met with the project team. And basically the sentiment was, we can just rip up that brief, that tender document, because that was just written by procurement. Basically, they had completely different requirements and priorities to that set out within the brief. That was just crazy, right? Because obviously all parties had spent so much time to get to that point. So I'm a big believer, we need to make sure that it's the right people writing this document and supporting it. So that's often a project sponsor or a project manager or a digital lead or something like that within your organization. But it's going to be someone who is actually part of the project. So you want them to have a vested interest from day one and be part of writing the brief. Now, of course, alongside that, you need to make sure that you've got the buy-in from any sort of senior leadership team within your organization. They need to have seen this brief and understood it and actually understand what are we asking of agencies so that we can then get their buy-in, but their approval of actually what the agencies are being asked to do. Again, a quick story, but working with an organization recently where, the kind of CEO hadn't even seen this brief and it got published. And then obviously it had to be redacted and we had to, go through a process where it was changed and then republished. You don't want to be in that position, okay? So make sure that we've had approval internally before it gets shared externally. And then the final part of this little section is how. And again, I find this is a topic that a lot of people don't talk about, but it's how to position the brief. Now, I touched on at the start that we want to get the best agencies interested in this project and almost allow others to self-qualify themselves out. Well, how do we do that? So we do that by actually having a well-written, well-structured brief that includes sentiments that allow agencies to self-qualify. So that could be a simple statement like we're looking for an agency that has worked within the health sector and has experience of a particular CRM. Now, immediately agencies can read that and go, okay, well, I either relate to that or I don't. And that will help you get the best agencies or the most suitable agencies in front of you. You might also say, look, I want an agency who can do a hybrid approach, one that can meet us in person from time to time and one that can meet us online. These are all things that you might want to include within your brief to set out your requirements and set out your stall at day one, but it allows the agencies who are reading this document to ascertain whether this is a project they should be going for or not. Now, really important that we get the balance here because, of course, we don't want to discourage creativity from the agency either. So if we're too prescriptive and we're too detailed, and it basically comes across to the agency that, look, I know exactly what we're looking for and I don't need anyone to tell me otherwise, then that's also a bad thing, okay? That's a little bit of a red flag to the agency. Because, if you're basically saying, look, we know best, then that's not often the best way to start a partnership, right? Because this is all about the starting point of creating a partnership with your potential agency. So get the balance between being prescriptive, so that we can actually say, look, this is what we're looking for and allow agencies to self-qualify themselves, but of course leave the door open to say, look, we want ideas from you agencies. We want you to come with your expertise and add value to what we think we need already from this project. So I hope that section's helpful, the kind of the who and the why and the how. But we're now going to move into this section where we actually think about the specific elements that need to be part of your website brief, okay? Think of these as headings within your document, okay? So under each of these headings, you should be writing something within your brief document. Okay, first things first. Like any good document, any good brief, we start with a bit of an introduction, okay? It's really important that the agency gets an opportunity to understand you as a business, what makes you tick, what are your values, and so on. So actually, don't just, I've said this time and time again before, but don't just kind of copy the paragraph from your About Us page, because of course, that's generic. The agency can see that anyway. But maybe try to put a different slant on that and understand kind of the dynamics of the agency. Why has this project come about? Are you going through maybe a digital transformation project, which is actually, looking at CRM and IT infrastructure and other things aside from the website? Just give a bit of a broader sense as to kind of, the organization, what you stand for and kind of how you've got to this point. Coupled with, information about yourself, we also need to then understand who do you target, so your target audience or ideal customer profile. Now, of course, a business can't be, all things to all men, if I can use that expression, but of course a website can't either. And we need to understand from the website's perspective who it is that you're targeting and what kind of user journeys might be involved in that. Now, of course, there might be more than one target audience, and that's absolutely fine. Often there might be 2, 3, 4, 5. But it'd be good for you to define those within the brief so that agencies can understand some of the kind of finer detail, the nuances about how we might go about creating this site to serve each of these target audiences. Okay, so that's quite an important part, and often a lot of organizations that we work with, they might actually have had this research done. They might have like a supporting document to go alongside this to say, look, we've actually done some analysis of our clients and their demographics, and they might include that within this section. So if you've got that, that would be fantastic because it really adds some detail to this document. The next part is more of a practical thing, right? So talk to us about your current website. So some businesses have lots of sites, so you might want to be specific and share the URL or multiple URLs that this project is relating to. But then talk to us about the pain points. So why has this project come about? Are you kind of frustrated that the website is difficult to maintain? It might be that the kind of design doesn't reflect the brand of the organization now, or it might be maybe the website isn't joined up to other systems like your CRM and account system and so on. It's helpful for the agency to understand that pain point because it's really that pain point or that challenge which is like the foundation of your brief, because it's off the back of that then the agency should have the opportunity to recommend the best things to overcome that challenge. So this is quite an important element. And then finally, you could also talk to the agency about what do you like about your current website, because so often we kind of jump to the negatives. I don't like this, I don't like that. It's really slow, doesn't look great. But actually, there might be some elements of the site that you do like, and you think actually on the new site we'd like to keep that. So again, it's really important that an agency can understand that from the off. Now, something we're really keen on at Webbox is having objectives and KPIs for every project. I always say, there's no point finishing a project and we all tap ourselves on the back and we think, great, that was a really good project, really glad that we did it, and that's the end. Because we want to be able to look back and first ask ourselves, did we meet and hopefully exceed the objectives that we set out to achieve? And secondly, talking about measuring success, can we actually put a tangible benefit to this new site? Now, ideally, we'd go as far as actually putting numbers to this. So something that we always do as default is we say, look, if we're launching a new site, it's going to have a page speed score of 90% or higher, absolutely bare minimum, okay? Because we know that page speed is a really important ranking factor. It's important for user experience. It's important for lots of things. So we actually define a number and we say, look, a KPI for this project is the website exceeds 90% in Google's page speed tool. Now, there might be other maybe conversion metrics or time on site metrics or something like that you want to put in the KPIs section so that we can actually measure the success of launching the new site. Now, this is important because you want there to be some accountability to the agency on whether this project has actually been successful or not. Now, moving through to the website features. Now, this is probably the meat of the brief, if I'm honest. So if you're thinking about the length of your brief, this section is probably going to be the longest section. Now, within this, you're going to talk to the agency around what it is that the website needs to do and how it's going to function. Now, we don't expect you to be developers, designers, and to get to really finite detail. If you can, that's fantastic, but that's not an expectation, nor is it really a requirement for a brief. That's probably better suited to a scope of work. So I think for this section, you need to kind of stick to high-level requirements of the website features. So let me give you some examples. You might say that we need e-commerce functionality to sell products, and our products are going to be categorized. We need to be able to search and filter our products, so on and so forth. Or you might say we need a blog, and the blog posts are going to be assigned to an author, and at the bottom of the blogs, we want there to be associated or related blog posts. You might have events on the site. So I need events to be listed. I need someone to be able to register for an event. That registration is going to take them off to Eventbrite so that they can pay, so on and so forth. So these are kind of just like headline requirements, okay? We don't get into really specific details at this point, but you really should, you should be kind of making sure that you've covered all of the core requirements. Now, I looked at a brief a few weeks ago, and within this section, it talked about the use of AI, and I thought they did it really well. So they basically just said, look, you know, AI is a huge topic right now. We feel like our website needs to incorporate some element of AI, but we're not quite sure where to start, so we want the agency to advise. That was like perfect, right? Because then agencies can go, right, okay, I think I can add some value here. We can actually talk about how we've used AI in websites and how it's actually moved the needle rather than just be gimmicky. And that is just like music to an agency's ears. So just get the balance again between what it is that you require and then also leaving the door open for an agency to be creative and come to the table with their suggestions. Now, building upon this, you might also get to a level where you're outlining integrations and third parties and automations. Okay. Now, of course, if you don't know this, please don't worry, because I'm conscious it might get a little bit technical. But if you can, again, just stay kind of top level. So does the website need to integrate with your CRM, the likes of HubSpot, Salesforce, so on? Maybe it needs to integrate into an email marketing platform like MailChimp, Force24, and so on. Maybe there's automations. So, you know, when someone inquires, this happens. Or when someone downloads a document, this happens. So if there's any automations, again, it'd be good to understand your kind of expectations there. And then also thinking about kind of how all of this works. If you know that it would need to take place through an API or through an embed code or just an external link, those are kind of helpful bits of information to put in the brief at this stage. But again, if that's too technical, then you can skip that. Okay, moving on to the content side of the website. So if you're able to, you might want to list the pages that the new website needs. But of course, the agency can collaborate with you and kind of build a sitemap, as part of the project. But if there's kind of key areas that you know are going to need to be on the new site, you might want to mention that. We've had a few briefs recently where the company will actually build their own sitemap because they've just done that kind of workshop internally. And that's great, gives the agency just a really clear understanding as to kind of what it is that you're looking for. But thinking about content then, it's also understanding, are you going to enter the content into the CMS, or would you like the agency to do that? Is there maybe content migration involved? So you might have a large quantity of content on your existing site and, we're talking thousands of pages or products and so on. Does that content need to be migrated to the new site? These are things which are quite fundamental to obviously a project and kind of especially the latter stages. So it's helpful to put that within the brief so that we've got an understanding of that from day one. Now, of course, timeline is going to be an important aspect for any business, but this should also be an element where an agency can self-qualify themselves. So let me give you an example. If your timeline is that you need this website done by the end of, June, as an example, but the agency knows that they just don't have capacity so that they can't complete it by that date, then at least it gives the option for the agency to say, we couldn't complete it by end of June, but if that's flexible, then we're still willing to further the conversation. So definitely worth putting your timelines within the brief. But also if you're open to timelines, so if you just think, look, there isn't a specific date, we just want to get this done as soon as practically possible, then again, just say that, and then the agency can advise on what would be achievable. Oh dear, here's the budget question. So this is a fundamental part of a website brief, okay? I'm a big believer that this is imperative to be part of a website brief document. But let me explain why I feel it's imperative. So lots of websites can be created with varying budgets. I'm just trying to think, trying the best way to explain it. And you could come to an agency and you could say, look, these are our requirements, and we've got 20K, or these are our requirements and we've got 50K. And the core difference between the two might be things like number of rounds of feedback, number of pages that get designed, number of blocks that get developed within the CMS. The CMS selection might be part of that, the number of workshops, and so on and so forth. So there's so many variables, but you could still develop and create the website for 20K, but you're not going to get, half of what you're looking for in the brief. But at 50K, you could have it all and maybe some as well. So I think it's really helpful to have a steer. This is not about the agencies going, right, well, let's just kind of quote their budget. This is about understanding kind of where your expectations are and whether they align with what the agency knows is possible within that budget. After doing this for 16 years, if you gave me a broad overview of your requirements and said the budget is X, I could probably give you a quick idea as to kind of whether that's achievable or not. And that's just because we've done hundreds of these projects and we kind of understand what is possible and what's not. So I think this is fundamental. And also, it's a key part of building a transparent working relationship. So if you can say, look, actually, this is our budget and we just want to get absolute best value for that, that, for me, sets us off on a really transparent working relationship. And in turn, the agency that you're partnering with should be ultra transparent with you too. So look, I know this is Marmite, but for me, really important part of reviewing a brief. Okay, so what else needs to go into it? So we need to understand your competition. Who are your competitors? And that might be within your sector, but potentially not directly in your sector. It might be who's leading the way, or it might just be a website that you really like the look of, or they've built a really good navigation, or you like a particular element, but they're outside of your sector. All of these things should be part of the brief so that the agency can understand who it is that you're competing with, but also what you actually like when you're reviewing other sites. What is it that you like the look of? And you might want to be specific and say, look, for this URL, I really like the way that they've done the navigation and the hero section of the homepage. And that's it. And that's cool, right? No problem at all. But it's helpful to understand that. So the agency can then go, okay, I get an idea as to kind of what they like and what they don't like, so that if we're to put design concepts forward at some point, we've got an understanding of what they're expecting. Now, from your side, it's really helpful to understand who the main points of contact are going to be. Now, this is always interesting, isn't it? Because ideally, we want there to be, maybe one or two core points of contact, and then obviously behind that, there might be a team who are working internally on this project. But from the agency's perspective, it's quite helpful to have one or two, so that messages aren't being missed or diluted or so on. But also, when you further the conversation with agencies after sending the brief, I think it's really important that you ask the agency who your point of contact might be. Because what you don't want is to, this is a story I've heard, you don't want to kind of be sucked in by someone who's part of the sales process. And then after that, you just get kind of lumped with someone who you don't really get on with. There's no synergy. And that maybe causes the project to kind of have a bit of friction. that's certainly not a good position for you to be in. So yeah, when you further the conversation with agencies, definitely ask, who will I be working with day to day, just so you understand that from day one. Now, a helpful part of the brief as well is understanding the process in which you're going to take internally. So what do I mean by that? I mean, are you looking for this to be kind of like a one stage, here's a brief and then can you send us a proposal and we'll make a decision? Is this, we're going to go through interviews, we're going to have some presentations, there's going to be a 2-stage or 3-stage process. Is this a formal tender process and there's going to be an option for, Q&As and so on? The process that you're going to take is kind of really important that you just share that with the agency. And I'd go as far as saying also the scoring matrix. So if you're doing more of a formal tender and there's a scoring matrix that you're working to, this is really helpful that you kind of include that within this brief or ITT. Also think about the practicalities of the dates that an agency might work towards. So when do you need the proposal submitted by? When are you going to shortlist maybe 2 or 3 agencies? When are you going to ask them to come and present to you? When might the project commence? Those kind of key dates are really important because obviously linking back to a previous point I made, the agency might need to self-qualify themselves based on whether that's realistic within their schedule. Now, the final element of what should be within your brief document is asking or being specific about what you want agencies to come back to you with, okay? So that might just be a proposal document. That might be being a bit more specific and saying, look, we're looking for the proposal, but also we want 3 case studies and 3 recommendations or testimonials. Or you might want the agency to come back to you with like an initial design concept, which I don't advocate, but that might be a requirement. So whatever your requirements are, then just please set them out in the brief so that the agency is clear on what they need to do in terms of moving this forward. So I've gone through each of the key elements within a website brief document. And as I say, these should be headings within your document that you then write under each. Now let's move to this last section, and this has some red flags. So yes, after doing this for quite a while now, there are definitely some red flags, and I just want to share 2 with you today so that you have these on your radar. So if you kind of come across them, hopefully you can not fall foul of them. So the first is, if you send out your brief to selected agencies and they just come straight back with a proposal, for me that's a real red flag, okay? And I'll tell you why. Because it's so impersonal, but it's also not giving them a chance to actually really understand the requirements. The brief is not a kind of extensive list of your requirements to the level of detail that it needs to be, okay? So what should be happening as a next step is the agency says, let's meet and discuss this in more detail. That's ultimately kind of what should happen next. And if they're not willing to do that, or they don't see a need to do that, for me that's just a big red flag. Or even off, similar point, even if you just have a quick call after receiving the brief and again just receive a proposal, for me that just smacks of templated proposals that are just sent out in bulk, and that's not what you want. Okay, so I think it's really really good just to be aware of that happens within the industry. Second point is, you've spent a long time putting this brief together and defining your requirements to, a fair amount of detail, not in huge detail, but a fair amount of detail. And then what happens is an agency comes back and says, no, actually what you need is this. For me, that's a red flag, because it kind of, it feels like they haven't listened to your requirements. But again, in the industry, there's a lot of pre-made solutions, and again, it smacks of just an agency going, look, we've got this pre-made solution and we're just trying to sell it to the next person. Whereas what they need to be doing is actually going, look, we've heard your requirements, we've kind of understood the brief, and then, putting a solution forward which actually kind of addresses that. And hopefully, if anything, just builds upon it. And we say, look, we hear your requirements and we can do all of that. But also with our kind of experience and insights, we also think you should be considering A, B, and C. That's really the kind of pinnacle of what you're trying to achieve here. So they're just 2 red flags that hopefully, now you know them, you can hopefully avoid if they happen to you. Okay, so I've talked a lot about the website brief, how we go about writing it, and hopefully off the back of this, you can kind of go away and start writing your brief. Now, to help you do that, we have 2 resources. So the first is we have a website brief template. This is a PDF document with all of these headings in the right order for you to then start to structure the document and start to kind of write under each heading, okay? I will send you a link to that afterwards, but there's also a QR code there. Now, secondly, brand new is we have an AI website brief builder. Now, this is in beta mode at the moment, but we'd love you to kind of trial it. This actually allows you to go through a process where we take in information about your requirements. So it's obviously working to the same structure that I've just kind of talked through. But what it does is actually kind of create a extensive brief document off the back, okay? And it will actually then email you a PDF of that brief document, okay? So again, want to leave you with that resource as well. Brand new, hot off the press, and I hope that is helpful to you. Now look, when we kind of start this process, I'm very conscious that it can be quite a daunting process to start. So if anyone does have questions or just needs a bit of a sounding board, then look, you've got my details. Please feel free just to drop me an email, and I'm very, very happy to give some time to help you craft that brief and get the most out of the process. Now, I can see 1 or 2 questions have come in already as kind of direct messages to me, but this is now your chance to kind of submit questions. So if you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat now. I'm going to be watching that chat window, and I will answer them live here on this call. So don't be shy. Please use the chat, and I will start to work through them. Okay, so I've had one sent direct, which is it's in relation to the comment I made at the start around who should write a brief. And it's kind of saying, well, actually, within this person's organisation, it is the procurement department that would write a brief. And obviously, I've just said that it shouldn't be. So look, everyone's experience is different. And it might well be that within your procurement department, you have the understanding of actually what needs to be part of a website brief. And if you do, that is fantastic, okay? It can still be the procurement department. My experience, as I've shared the story, is that sometimes it can be quite disconnected between the procurement department and then maybe the marketing department. So I think this is probably on a case-by-case basis, right? If your organisation is more joined up than that of my story, then absolutely go for it. That makes sense. Okay, I've got another question here. Okay, so I'll just read it out. So do you have any extra tips on how to approach brief writing when we are hoping to onboard an agency for multiple website projects at once? Okay. Very good question. So I think if you're looking to put a brief together for a larger project, multiple websites, then I would probably ask myself some holistic questions. So do I need one agency to pitch for all websites? Or am I actually looking for a number of agencies who are going to build specific sites? If the answer is the former, where you're looking for one agency to build the multiple sites, then I think you need to have a clear idea as to whether these websites are going to be related in any way. So might the design be, or the core design be shared amongst multiple sites? or are they going to look completely different, okay, from a layout and a structure perspective? Of course, they can each have their own branding. Are they going to be linked? So can the user go from one website to another, maybe within a toggle in the header navigation? So you might want to start thinking about that. But I think the fundamental is, are we looking for one agency here for the whole project or multiple, and then taking it from there? I think that's a core for me. The other thing is I would probably think in the brief about some of the practicalities of having multiple websites. So post-launch, think about how are we going to host multiple websites, and what might that kind of fee structure look like? How are we going to support multiple websites? So do they each have their own support agreement, or is it pooled into one central support agreement? So I would specify that in the brief. And then finally, off the top of my head, I would also think about the kind of training and resource that you might require internally. So would the agency need to train and support each individual kind of sub-business and sub-team with the CMS training and kind of their content entry and migration? Or is this going to just be, again, a pooled effort where, one centralized CMS training session, as an example, could be provided for the whole business? And again, this will come down to whether the websites share the same structure or whether they're all completely different. So they're just some extra tips on things you might need to consider when one business is actually looking for multiple websites to be built. Okay, another question here. Do you have a methodology of roughly assigning a budget to a website, or even any examples? Okay, really good question. You probably noticed earlier when I was talking about budget, I struggled a little bit to kind of put it into words, because this is sometimes a sensitive topic, because I think what happens traditionally is people play this kind of poker game. So they've got a really straight face and they say, look, we don't know what we're expecting. We don't know what the budget is. They just want the agency to come in and give a quote. You actually just don't get the best result with that, because that just means the agency comes in and says, look, based on your requirements, we think this is 50K. And then you go, oh, well, I actually thought it was going to be 20. And we go, right, okay, well, we're really kind of misaligned. And then regardless of what happens after that, regardless of whether the agency can turn that around or whether we kind of say, look, let's work on different requirements or whatever, we're all on the back foot. And it just doesn't start for a good relationship. So I think we've got to be transparent about what the budget is. In terms of actually using a specific methodology, there isn't a specific methodology, right? So I've done this 16 years, right? There isn't something where you just go, if that, then the budget should be that. However, I think it's worth doing some things to ascertain what that budget should be. So first thing would be internally, ask stakeholders, ask the business, ask the accounts team, whoever's appropriate, what did we spend on our last website? So that's your starting point, because that's what the business was willing to spend last time this process was done. I would also then kind of ask your peers. So you will probably know marketers in similar businesses or even different businesses, and just asking your peers, what did they spend on their last site, or how did they achieve it? What budget did they set? And thirdly, if you're having kind of like informal conversations with agencies, asking the agency's advice, what kind of budget should we be putting to a project like this before we then go out and send the brief document to people, okay? So there's a number of ways that you could kind of spin this. Just adding on to the question here is the number of pages or level of quality would influence the expected budget. Really interesting point here, Elliot. I think actually every agency is different, but actually at Webbox, the number of pages doesn't actually make an impact, because we don't look at it as kind of a per page fee. We actually break it down a bit more granular than that, and we understand how many specific blocks do we need to design and develop to then build up the relevant page layouts to then address the pages. So it's kind of like a number of layers down from what you're talking about. So I guess you could, in theory, start to get down to that granular level to say, how many specific blocks would I need designed and developed to then, create the page layouts that I'm looking for, which then infuses the number of pages. It's not quite the same, but I guess you could use that as a calculation. But definitely, I think asking peers, asking the business what they've previously spent would be kind of a good starting point. All right. Okay, great stuff. Lovely. Right, I'm just checking the chat just in case there's anything else, but I think that's all of our questions for today. Let me just give a double check. Yeah, okay, fantastic, lovely. Well, look, I just want to say a massive thank you for joining this session. We run a number of webinars like this, so if you want to check out our Eventbrite page, we've got a number of webinars coming up that you might want to join. And also, if you follow us on Eventbrite, you'll get notified when we release new topics for these kind of webinars. But for now, I'll be in touch shortly with a copy of the recording and these resources for the website brief template and AI website brief builder. But in the meantime, I hope you have a lovely afternoon and thank you for joining this webinar today.